Hi everyone, welcome to episode number 105 of Ask a Property Manager. It's time to list your apartment for rent, but what do you ask before you start scheduling those showings? We're going to answer that question today, and stick around to the end of the show. We're going to give you a bonus tip on how to save a ton of time when it comes to showing your apartments. Stay tuned. If you've ever listed an apartment for rent on Facebook or Zillow before, you know just how quickly it can become overwhelming to get through all of the responses that you receive in just a short time span. This is especially true when you have an apartment that's in a very in-demand area or something that's priced very, very reasonably. The fact of the matter is that it's very, very simple for someone to send you a message asking if your place is still available, and then you're left to sort through all of those responses to hopefully find a tenant that's capable of renting your apartment. On Facebook, it's literally one button that somebody needs to press in order to ask you if an apartment is still available. On Zillow, Trulia, Hotpads, I think it may be 2 button clicks to send you an email. It's not a complicated thing. The point of the matter is that in many instances, most of these people are not taking the time to read the listing descriptions. Sometimes they're not even flipping through the listing photos to see if this place is what they're looking for. They're sending mass amounts of communication out in the hopes to get somebody to reach back out to them. And the reason they're doing that is because in a lot of instances, you will have property owners or landlords or property managers that don't take down old listings or get overwhelmed and stop responding or whatever the case. So it's just as hard for the tenants to try to find place as it is for you to try to find a tenant. And that's why you have this problem. So essentially, they just start firing off messages to as many people as possible to try to get their goal accomplished, which is finding a place. Obviously, that's semi-congruent with your goal of trying to get someone into your place. It's just a matter of how do you go about sorting through everything. We'll sometimes get 100 to 150 messages just in the first day that we have a place listed. And the problem is a lot of those people are not going to qualify for the apartment. Going through a lot of the process and going through the process of showing them the apartment, it's a gigantic waste of time for both you and for the potential applicant if you can find out on the front end that they're not going to qualify for the apartment. That's the entire goal of the pre-screening questionnaire, which is what we're here to talk about today. The entire goal of the pre-screening questionnaire is to weed out applicants that would not qualify for the apartment before you even have the opportunity to show them the home. Essentially, what you're trying to do is shrink the number of people that you're actually showing the property to down to those that may qualify. Just trying to skim off the top and get the ones that may qualify in to take a look at the place. So basically what you want to do is ask a series of questions to try to gain some insight into this person's situation and whether or not they would actually qualify for the apartment that you have listed for rent. Keep in mind, you're not trying to go through the formal qualification process at this point. You have an application process for that. This is much more informal. It's asking a few questions just to get a feel for whether or not somebody's going to be the right fit for the apartment. You can ask as many or as few questions as you want in your pre-screening questionnaire, but I find that the more questions you ask, the less likely you actually are to get a response from the questions. And understand that that's going to be part of your process. Most people will not actually respond to you when you send them a list of questions that they need to respond to. That's them self-selecting out. They've already decided the 5 or 6 questions that you're asking, that's too much work for them to go through. They've self-selected themselves out of the process right off the jump. You're only going to start talking to people who are responding to those questions that give you the information that you're looking for so you can decide whether or not this might be the right person to show the apartment to. It is a pretty straightforward process. They're going to go through and answer those questions, or actually I should say, think about the people that don't answer the questions. If they don't answer your pre-screening questions, what do you think the chances are that they're going to go through and fill out your formal rental application? What do you think the chances are that they're going to read and sign your lease and understand the terms of it or follow it? So really, the people who are self-selecting because they're not answering the questions are doing you a massive favor, at least in my opinion. So even before you get to the showing, you're kind of seeing how people interact with you and whether you can interact with them. We ask a total of 6 pre-screening questions. Some people ask more, some people ask less. I can remember there was a discussion on a message board a couple years back about pre-screening questionnaires, and one person had a list of 24 questions that they asked. 24 questions that they asked before they were willing to rent an apartment, or not even rent, show an apartment to someone. That's too many questions. Like, that's a formal application in the form of a series of individual questions at that point. you're better off tailoring it down to just the number of questions that you need to get the response so that you can make a determination as to what you want to do. We basically pick the questions that we felt give us that information so that we can make a decision as to whether or not we want to extend a showing to this person. So our questions are, number one, when are you looking to move and why? This one's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to want to know when someone's looking to move and preferably why they're looking to move as well. If you have someone that is looking to move 6 months down the road, but you have a vacancy right now today, chances are that person's not going to be a good fit. If someone is moving because they were just thrown out of their previous accommodations, chances are that person's not going to be a good fit for you. Best to get that person out of the process on the front end. Question 2, how many people will be living in the home? You have to be careful with how you ask this question. I always ask the question exactly as phrased. How many people will be living in the home? What you don't want to ask is how many adults and how many children would be living in the home, because that could put you dangerously close to committing a fair housing violation. Typically, the person responding is going to offer up that information as to how many adults and how many children will be living in the home, and you won't even have to ask for it. They'll just say, oh, it's going to be me and my wife and my 3 kids, or whatever the case may be. You probably won't even have to ask how many adults and how many children. More than likely, they're going to offer that information up on their own. If they don't offer that information up on their own, just record the number of people. Don't dig any deeper into that. So the reason that you're going to want to ask this question, obviously, is that if you are renting a studio apartment and they're trying to put 5 people in your studio apartment, that's obviously not going to work. You're not going to want to show the person the apartment because you know that it's going to be an overcrowding situation. Chances are it's probably not even going to be legal depending on the area that you live in. Our third question, what is the combined monthly income of everyone living in the household? This one is pretty straightforward. We look for a net income, so after taxes and deductions, of 3 times the rent in income. So that's our requirement for our rental application process. If someone comes up way short of that, there's no point in showing them the apartment. And we'll go through and ask them, do you have any other jobs? Do you have any part-time work? Do you have any assistance programs that are helping you out, to try to get all of the income recorded so we know what it is that they're dealing with to make a determination as to whether or not they would qualify. But if somebody comes up way short, there's no point showing the apartment. You're better off moving on to the next more qualified candidate. If somebody comes up a little bit short, we're probably still going to go ahead and schedule that showing, because we found that in a lot of instances, once we actually see the paperwork and do the screening, some of those people are going to wind up qualifying. So if they're, close marginally, I would probably go ahead and schedule that showing, but if they're way off, then it's probably just not worth it, unless they have a cosigner or a situation like that. But that's another story for another day. Question number 4, what is your credit score? We ask this because we do have a credit score requirement for our units of 600. Some people use a higher requirement, some people will use a lower requirement, some people have no requirement at all. But this is what works for us, and you're going to have to do some research to find out what works best in your market. One thing I have found is that as rent rates climb, generally speaking, that credit score requirement is going to be able to climb right along with it. 650 is another common number that gets thrown around, but we chose 600 based on our market and the type of properties that we rent out. The nice thing is that when you have more than one applicant on the application, you get to see everyone's credit score, and we take the average of those scores. So if you have someone that has damaged credit, they may be able to still qualify for an apartment if their significant other has good credit, or if they bring in a cosigner that has good credit, or something along those lines. They do still have options, even if they have a bad credit situation. Some people won't know what their credit score is off the top of their head, or may only have a general idea. So this question may not be answerable by everyone. It may or may not be useful depending on who it is that you're talking to. Generally speaking, most people will have some kind of an idea though. Question number 5 is, do you have animals? And again, this is another question that we word very, very specifically. Do you have animals? And the reason that we word it that way is because our hope is to draw out any emotional support animals or service animals that the applicant may have, so that we know about that on the front end and can talk to them about how that process works, because we do have to approve the ESA or the SA as part of the application process. I shouldn't say we have to approve it. We have to get the paperwork and everything in line for that animal during our application process. So we're trying to draw that information out on the front end. We specifically say animals and not pets because of the ESAs and the service animals. because they're not a pet. They're a piece of durable medical equipment, just the same as a CPAP machine or a pair of crutches would be. Some people still won't mention their ESA or their service animal until after they've come out for the showing, or until after they apply, or until after they've moved in. But at least we're making an attempt to find out about it on the front end. And last but not least, does anyone who will be living in the home smoke or vape? I think this is pretty self-explanatory as to why we ask this one as well. We don't permit smoking inside any of our properties, and that would include vaping as well. If someone wants to stand outside and smoke or vape, we have no problem with it as long as they dispose of their waste correctly. That's really the only thing that we care about. All that said, we did have a property that we lost. It burned down because someone was smoking inside, and the cigarette, I don't know exactly how it happened, if it hit a carpet or whatever, but we lost a property that way. So this is something that we take seriously, and we do ask it as part of our pre-screening questionnaire. So there's a few different ways to actually handle the answering of the questions. Most people are going to just copy and paste the questions over and over and over again to anybody who sends them a message about the apartment. Perfectly acceptable. That's the way that we do it. And then when somebody responds to us answering the questions, we move forward with getting them set up for a showing at that point. Other people will go a little bit further and set up a Google Docs sheet to collect responses. The point is, however you go about choosing to collect the information, make sure that you record it so that you can compare it to somebody's rental application if they do choose to apply. The number of times that I've had somebody say, oh, it's just going to be me living in the apartment when they scheduled a showing, and then they come out and there's 7 people that come out and look at the apartment with them, but only one rental application with one person on it. There's red flags there. So having some information that you can reference back to is not necessarily a bad thing in this situation. That's basically the way that I would handle it. I put it on my calendar right next to the person's name and phone number, so that way I have it as a reference when I go to look at their rental application. Now on to that bonus tip that I'd mentioned regarding scheduling your showings. There's no reason that you need to schedule an individual showing for every single person that wants to see your unit. And as a matter of fact, that's actually an incredibly impractical way to go about doing this. My recommendation is to schedule an open house time, like a 1 to 2 hour time block, at a time that's convenient for you. It fits your calendar, that would also be convenient for the people you're trying to rent to. So for instance, you may not want to book something in the middle of the workday if your tenant base works typically 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. You may want to look at a Saturday morning or a Saturday afternoon for your showing. But your goal is to get as many people as possible to come through the doors at that one showing so that you're not booking 15 or 20 individual appointments. Schedule all those people to come in during that one block of time. Have your rental applications ready, anything that you might need for them to be able to apply. That way you can block out your 2 hour block of time, have the entire thing done. You don't have to make several trips back and forth to the property, and you may wind up with more than one rental application as a result of it. In addition, keep in mind that you have, say, 5 people that schedule to come out and look at the apartment. For every 5 people that say, yes, I'm going to come out on Saturday and look at your apartment, you may have 2 or 3 that show up. People skip apartment showing appointments all the time and think nothing of it. They don't cancel, they don't send a text message, they're not going to call and say, hey, I'm not going to make it. They're just going to burn your time up. They're just not going to show up. So if you're scheduling individual appointments, that's a real good way to burn gigantic chunks of your time by running back and forth to the property. Go ahead and schedule those time blocks when you know you can be there, when you know that the people who are interested in your property can be there, and save yourself a ton of time and aggravation by just scheduling those open houses. By the way, this also shows that there's tremendous demand for the unit. So if you have a bunch of people there all at once, you're probably going to get multiple applications simply based off the fact that there's interest in this apartment. I want this. I don't want the other guy to get it. We're going to jump on this right away. That's the best possible position for you to be in when you're going to rent an apartment, is multiple applications where you can make a decision on best qualified tenant. That's the best possible scenario for you as a housing provider. Thank you so much for watching. I truly do appreciate it. If you learned something today, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Hit that thumbs up button as well. And if you have a friend or a family member that may be able to learn something from this, do us a favor and share it with them too. Every comment, question, and every comment and question helps us to grow. So if you do have a question or a comment, drop them below. We'll talk to you soon.